والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وأصحابه ومن سار على سبيله إلى يوم الدين أما بعد. So in continuing discussing the book Bulugh al-Maram, and we'll be continuing today regarding Kitab al-Buyu. So discussing concerning what is mentioned regarding al-Kitab al-Buyu, regarding business transaction, and we're discussing concerning the author, rahimahullah. He discussed concerning that the title of this chapter concerning Bab Shuruti, regarding concerning the condition of buyu, and also wama nuhya anhu, and also those things that have been forbidden regarding al buyu. So we have started that discussion, discussed several hadith, and today we'll discuss concerning the hadith regarding the hadith of Aisha that relates to aspect regarding certain type of business transaction that are not considered to be valid. So read the hadith of Aisha, and because the length of this hadith, that will as we discuss the hadith, we'll mention hadith in Arabic. Aywa.
Alhamdulillah wa ala Rasulillah. Hadith number 657 from Bab al-Buyuh. Narrated Aisha radiallahu anha Barira came to her and said, I had arranged to buy my freedom for 9 uqiyah, 1 uqiyah to be paid annually, so help me. Aisha radiallahu anha replied, if your people are pleased that I should pay the amount to them, I shall have the right to inherit from you. I shall do so. Barira went to her people and told them about it, but they refused the offer. When she came back, Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam was sitting in the house. She said, I offered that to them, but they insisted that the right to inherit from me should be theirs. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam heard that, and Aisha radiallahu anha told him about it. So he said to Aisha radiallahu anha, take her and stipulate that the right to inherit from her will be yours, for the right of the inheritance belongs only to the one who has set a slave free. Aisha radiallahu anha did so. Allah's Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam then stood up among the people to address them. So after praising and extolling Allah, he sallallahu alaihi wasallam said, to proceed, what is the matter with some men who make conditions which are not in the book of Allah, the Might, the Majestic? Any condition which is not in Allah's book is invalid, even if there are 100 conditions. Allah's decision is more valid and Allah's condition is more binding. The right of inheritance belongs only to the one who has set a slave free. Agreed upon, and the wording is Al-Bukhari's. Muslim has buy her and set her free and make the stipulation that the right to inherit from her will be yours.
So this is the hadith that is mentioned regarding in the Bab of Buyu by Imam Bukhari rahimahullah. So as for this hadith, that will first concerning start by mentioning concerning the tarjuma of Aisha radiallahu anha. So regarding that, we'll first start by mentioning concerning matters pertaining to Aisha radiallahu anha. So regarding concerning Aisha, al-Mu'mineen, then she's one considered to be one of the mothers of the believers, al-Mu'mineen. As for the name of Aisha, that is Aisha bint Abu Bakr as-Siddiq. So the name of Aisha is Aisha bint Abi Bakr as-Siddiq. Also, as for her kunya, she's referred to as Abdullah. So as for her kunya, she's Abdullah. And as for her mother, that is they state that her mother is Ruman bint Amir. Ruman bint Amir. And that Aisha rad anha of the Prophet Islam wives, and that he got married to her that while she was still in Mecca. And they mentioned that it was either a year or 2 years or 3 years before the migration from Mecca to Medina that they got married. But they didn't per se formally live as husband and wife after she arrived in Medina. So they got married while she was still in Mecca, 2 or 3 years before migration. But when they lived in Medina, moved to Medina, then that was when they started to live as husband and wife. Also regarding Aisha rad anha, that she died when the Prophet Islam around that she was around 18 years when the Prophet Islam died. So she was of her age that she was around 18 when the Prophet when the Prophet Islam died. So they lived together as husband and wife for around tisa sinin. So they lived as husband and wife for around 9 years. And also that she's Aisha rad anha is the only of the wives of the Prophet Islam that he married when she was as a virgin. So the only wife that he married as a bikr, as a virgin. all of his other wives were also women who already married. Also the Aisha rad anha that she said to be one of the fuqaha amongst the fuqaha, amongst the Sahaba. She said to be one of the fuqaha amongst the Sahaba, and also of the person of ilm. Also, she was known to be, as mentioned, regarding to know, she also had that very precise regarding her views and take on things. So at times very accurate regarding her views on things. And also that they mentioned that Aisha, as in the book of amongst the ulama of hadith, that amongst the Sahaba, amongst the female, amongst the Sahaba, who said to have narrated many hadith upon the Prophet ﷺ. So amongst those, the Sahaba, and amongst the female, the main female, that have narrated many of the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ. So she considered to be of the mukthirun, of those who have narrated many hadith, over 1,000 plus a hadith upon the Prophet ﷺ. As for Aisha mentions, توفيت, that she died concerning the year 57, the year 59 year of the Hijrah, the 59th year of the Hijrah, that she died. And they mentioned concerning that it was concerning that it was, so they mentioned that she died, and it was in the month of Ramadan, and also it is stated regarding that, she was buried during the night, and also in Baqiyah in Medina, and also the person that prayed, or janazah, prayed upon her was Abu Hurairah. So the one who prayed upon her was Abu Hurairah. Ta'ala anhum ajma'in. So that's concerning Aisha, the narrator of the hadith that is mentioned here. So as for the next matter that is mentioned here regarding concerns, that's the top concern, the narrator of the hadith, Aisha. As for as what is mentioned regarding the takhrij of the hadith, mentioned muttafaqun alayh wal-lafdhu lil-Bukhari, that this hadith in the Bukhari and Muslim, and also the hadith also that is stated here, that the hadith that it is the wording that is mentioned here is that of Imam Bukhari. So the wording that is mentioned here are the words found in Sahih Bukhari. It is mentioned by Sheikh Abdullah Al-Fawzan in his explanation of Bulugh al-Maram, that he mentioned فقد أخرجه Bukhari, that Bukhari rahimullah have collected this hadith في أربعة وعشرين موضعا من صحيحه, that Imam Bukhari rahimullah, that he have mentioned this hadith over 24 places in his Sahih. So in the book of Sahih Bukhari, that Imam Bukhari rahimullah have mentioned this hadith over 24 times in the book. So it is mentioned repeatedly in the book of Sahih, in the book of Imam Bukhari rahimahullah. That he mentioned that amongst the first time that is mentioned in Sahih Bukhari, Kitab al-Salat. So in the Bab of Salat it is mentioned. Also it is mentioned in the Bab of Buyu, and also Kitab al-Nikah. So it is mentioned many places in Sahih Bukhari. So over 20 something places in Sahih Bukhari. So that's concerning what is mentioned. So also the hadith in Sahih Muslim, and the wording here that is mentioned in Sahih Muslim. When they mention the hadith here they mention the hadith here that they mention regarding takhrij of the hadith in more detail, that they mention that this particular hadith that have been mentioned here, that they mentioned that akhrajahu, that Imam al-Bukhari wa Muslim, as mentioned here by Sheikh Halaq. Then he mentioned others who have narrated this hadith or collected this hadith other than Bukhari and Muslim. He mentioned akhrajahu Abu Dawood. So the hadith can be found in Abu Dawood, At-Tirmidhi in his Al-Jama', An-Nasa'i in his Sunan, also Ibn Majah. So from this the hadith in Kutub Sitta, Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Majah, and others that have narrated this hadith. So that's concerned the hadith that can be found in those places, different places, as mentioned by Sheikh Halaq rahimahullah. Also others who have mentioned regarding takhrij of this hadith, that Sheikh Mahir, that I've mentioned regarding when he mentioned this hadith of Aisha rad anha, where he mentioned concerning takhrij of the hadith, that he mentioned regarding concerning the hadith, he mentioned akhrajahu, this particular hadith, that it can be found in Imam Ash-Shafi fi Musnadihi, that can be found by Shafi rahimahullah in his Al-Musnad, also Ahmed in his Musnad, also Imam Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Jarud, Ibn Hibban, wal Bayhaqi. So these are the other sources that have narrated or collected this hadith. Shafi in his Musnad, Ahmed in his Musnad, Bukhari, Muslim, Abu Dawood, Ibn Majah, Tirmidhi, Nasa'i, Ibn Jarud, Ibn Hibban, and also Bayhaqi. So these are the places that this hadith can be found, or those books of hadith that this hadith can be found. So as for the hadith, and also you have some additional wording that is mentioned, that he mentioned, Imam Muslim rahimahullah, that also adds some additional wording of the hadith mentioned, يشتريها واعتقيها واشتري لهم ولا. So that additional word that is mentioned here, they mentioned that they stated there concerning that additional wording, it is found in Sahih Muslim. So that extra wording, it is found in Imam Muslim rahimahullah. So the hadith, that's concerning takhrij of the hadith, that's concerning takhrij of the hadith. So as for now discussing the hadith, by way of what can be taken and the benefits from this hadith, it is stated by Sheikh Abdullah Fawzan, when he mentions hadith, he stated concerning هذا hadith hadithun azim, that this hadith of Aisha and what it contains is a very important hadith. Then he mentioned Jalil al-Qadr, that of great benefit, kathir fawahid, many benefits can be taken from it. يستنبط منه الحافظ ابن حجر قريبا من 120 فائدة. That he mentioned that, the meaning that Hafid ibn Hajar in his book Fath al-Bari, when he discussed this hadith, that he took from it over 120 something benefits. So Ibn Hajar rahimahullah al-Asqalani in his book Fath al-Bari, when he discussed this hadith, that he took over 120 benefits from this hadith, showing them the the importance of this hadith and the great benefit that can be taken from this hadith. So that's concerning that particular hadith. He even mentioned Sheikh Abdullah Fawzan, we mentioned that you find that, that even that he mentioned that even some have written on this matter, that also others have concerned, also taken other benefit from this. So others have taken that the benefit from this over, that from some others who have taken benefit from this hadith that exceed over 300 benefits that can be taken from this hadith. So it shows regarding the importance of this hadith. We'll find that some have written a book specific about this hadith and have extracted over 300 plus benefits from this hadith. So it shows the great importance and the huge benefit that can be taken from this hadith. As for sharh of the hadith, so we go to the hadith by way of what is mentioned here regarding of the points that have been discussed in this hadith. We mentioned Jatni Barira. So and the hadith of Aisha anha, she mentioned Jatni Barira. So they mentioned that Barira, she's Mawla Aisha. She was like the slave girl of Aisha. That Aisha anha ishtaraha, Aisha, she bought her and also she released her, set her free. Wakanat, and she used to kind of somewhat Khadimat Aisha used to kind of somewhat to serve in the service of Aisha anha before she bought her. So before Aisha bought her, she used to do some chores or things for Aisha. So Aisha bought her, and then also after buying her, she then released her, she freed her. Then I mentioned that also Barira, as a female, that she was on she was like married or with the person Mughith Mawla Abi Ahmed ibn Jash al-Asadi. So she was like living, or her husband, as that she was with, or she was under the person, or she was under the control, or the person that owned her was Mughith Mawla Abi Ahmed ibn Jash al-Asadi. Then I mentioned that Wakana Abdan, and also it is just considered he also was the Ab. Some mentioned he was not, but she was with him. Then I mentioned that when she was freed, then the Prophet ﷺ that he asked her, or he gave her a choice. So the Prophet ﷺ, when she was freed and released, then the Prophet ﷺ, he gave her a choice that either she can remain with him or to leave him. And he mentioned that she chose to separate from him. Then that's concerning that, and this hadith will be discussed further again regarding in the bab of nikah. So as for that's concerning Barira, concerning what is mentioned regarding her, that she was at one point, she used to be in the service of Aisha, but she was like a slave girl. Then eventually Aisha bought her, then also released her, but also she was under a person called Mughith Mawla Abi Ahmed. Then eventually, and it is said that he was an abd. Some mention that he was a free person. Then eventually it is stated that when she was released, when she came to the Prophet ﷺ, then he gave her the option, that would gave an option for her to go, and she separated from Mughith, and that's concerning matters relating to her. As for the hadith, it mentioned that she came to Aisha anha, which is Barira, فقال كتبت أهلي. So she mentioned that, that I have mentioned katabtu ahli. Ahli in this in this context meaning those who owned her. So ahli mean the people who owned her. Then it mentioned that katabtu ahli. So kitaba, by way of a slave, they mentioned that with the slave that they make a contract or an agreement with the person who's their master that they want to buy themselves, they want to buy their freedom. So the person's a slave that they approach their master and they come to an agreement or an agreement that they would buy themselves out, out of slavery and so they can become a free person. So she came to that agreement with her. She wanted to buy her freedom from her master. So that's concerning. They refer to it as kitaba. So this is referred to as kitaba in relation to a slave and their master regarding having this contract that the slave will buy themselves out of freedom. So during that time, it showed that concern that it was this was a practice that was done during then. So it mentioned that with this kitaba, she mentioned فَكَتَبْتُ أَهْلِ عَلَى تِسْعَ أَوَاقٍ. So the agreement that she would pay them the amount which was over 7, it was 9 awaq with a form of currency then. They mentioned that the currency then then concerning our and they mentioned that في كل آمٍ أوقية. So in every year annually she paid them a certain amount. So every year she paid them a certain percentage or a certain amount would be paid yearly until she covered the entire amount. So the amount that they agreed upon was tisa awaq, which was 9 awaq, and that each year she give one portion of this. She give uqya each year annually. So they mentioned that that is around concerning that that is around arbaun dirham, about 40 dirhams regarding concerning that what was that worth. But overall, that it was some form of currency or an agreement that was made between the slave and the master that they will pay a certain amount. Then in continuing the hadith that it mentioned that then she went to Aisha and فَعِينِنِي, that she asked Aisha for Aisha to someone to assist her regarding concerning that in getting her freedom. So she asked for the assistance of Aisha regarding getting her freedom. فقلت يعني Aisha قالت لها إن أحب أهلك أن أعدها لهم يكون ولايتك that لي, that if you wish that I will approach your owners, the ones who owned you, and if I wish that she can somewhat try to buy her from them immediately. So Aisha will just pay everything and get her under her. And then the wilaya will come back to Aisha, which is concerned. Aisha will be the one that then now owns her. Aisha will be the one to own her. And by way of wilaya, also with wilaya, then that person that you can inherit from that person. You can also a form of inheritance that can take place regarding this matter. So from the slave, you can inherit from them by way of wilaya. قال فعلت, Aisha says, no, that I can do, so approach them and see if they're willing to sell you to me type of thing. Then I mentioned ذهبت بريرة إلى أهلها. So Barira, the slave girl, went back to her family, to the people who owned her. So the word أهلها هنا mean concern the people who owned her. فقالت لهم, so she said to them, so she approached them and put to them the proposal regarding Aisha buying her from them. فقال فأبوا عليها, though they refuse. فجاءت من عندهم ورسول عليه السلام جالس. So that went back to the Prophet عليه السلام and he was sitting. So they mentioned regarding concern of this matter that wilaya, as mentioned, concerned that a wilaya by way of the person being freed, being bought, and then would be freed. That's concerning al-itq. So that's concerning of itq. So there's various ways when a person can free or a person who's enslaved, that they can, or the person who's a slave, that they can be freed. There are several ways. So of this way concern a person buying their own freedom, or someone else can buy that person and release them. So in this case, she was looking at the different options. One, proposed to her, to those who owned her, that she can buy her freedom, or in another approach, another way is for Aisha to buy her and then release her. So when Aisha went to the people that and when the matter was put to them, that they refused this. So it mentioned, فإنما was it mentioned regarding concerning hadith, it mentioned that. So the matter was raised to the Prophet ﷺ, فقالت لي, so that's a فقالت, so it was said, إني قد, Aisha رضي عنها said that, إني قد أردت ذلك عليهم فأبوا إلى أن تكون ولا لهم. So the Aisha mentioned that I put to them that I'll buy her and release her, but they refuse based upon the grounds that they want the wala, that they want that she to have some connection still with them by way of that they can inherit from her, from the slave girl. So they mentioned, فسمع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم, to the Prophet he heard what was said, فأخبرت عائشة النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم فقال, so the Prophet then he said to Aisha رضي عنها, خذيها واشترتي لهم ولا فإنما أولا لمن أعتق. So the Prophet says, that take her, go with the contract, go with washtarit, that to put as a condition that the walaya is for them, as they mentioned that فإنما الولاء لمن اعتقد, but in right, but it mentioned but the walaya is for the person who released the slave. The walaya, meaning that connection where they can inherit from each other, that it goes back to the person who did release the slave. Then I mentioned that فقالت عائشة, فقالت عائشة, that she did what she was told. فثم قام رسول الله السلام في الناس خطيبا فحمد الله فأثنى عليهم. So the Prophet Islam, that he stand amongst the people and that he made a public address. So he started by the praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, وأثنى عليه, and also the glorification of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. ثم قال أما بعد. Then he mentioned أما بعد. So the ulama mentioned regarding concern the person after praise of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and the person wish to go into the other, what he wish to discuss, for him to say amma bad. As for what is sometimes said by some, wabad, then that is not per se the correct way. The most correct way is for the person to say amma bad. As for saying wabad or thumma bad, then that's not the most correct way. As the Prophet of Islam, that he would say amma bad. ما بعد it mentions the shahid from the hadith, mentioned the shahid, the main point from the hadith mentioned ما بال رجال يشترطون شروطا ليست في كتاب الله. Why are there people, men, that are placing conditions that are not in the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And the ulama mentioned concerning kitab Allah, I mean concerning in the sharia of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the deen of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So people are putting conditions that are not stipulated by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala regarding concerning a deen. I mentioned laysa fi kitabillah, I mean concerning what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have legislated. So this is concerning what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have legislated and ruled, then these are things to be followed. So if a condition, so rules that are not in line with what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have legislated, then it is not considered to be valid. So kitab will mean the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and also with us, we include also the sunnah. So regarding concerning, as he mentioned, where the Prophet has mentioned, ma bala rijal, what's the affairs? Why are people yashtarituna shurutan laysat fi kitabillah? So kitabillah also include concerning a sunnah. So regarding concerning a sharia, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by extension the sunnah. Then I mentioned ما كان من شرط ليس في كتاب الله فهو باطل. Any condition that is not within the line, not in line with the sharia, for it is considered to be batil. It's considered to be invalid. So batil, the ulama mentioned concerning did as-sahih. Batil meaning something that it is not valid, it is invalid, is not counted. So that's concerning did as-sahih. So sahih means something which is valid, but batil is something which is invalid. So that's concerning what is meant by this linguistically. And also istilahan, they mentioned that a simplified explanation of what is considered to be batil, but as mentioned by Sheikh Basami mentioned, ma waqa ghayru sahih. That thing, something that have occurred but is not valid, something that have occurred but it is not done properly or not done correctly, min asliha, from the source of it. So if something is done from the source, from the origins, from the start of that thing, it is not valid, it's considered to be batil. It is considered to be batil and should not be acted upon. It should not also be carried out and should not be acted upon. So that is what is considered to be batil. Then I mentioned, then the hadith is considered to mention regarding mentioned وَإِنْ كَانَ مِئَ شَرْط, even it is 100 shart. They mentioned concerning mi'ah shart that the Prophet intend by this kind of something to show, regardless of the how many shart conditions have been placed, if they're not valid, regardless of the number, it doesn't amount to anything. So any shart or amount of conditions that a person put upon others that are not valid Islamically, they do not count. They have no bearing. They have no value. So they have no value. So it mentioned regarding concerning that Sheikh Abbasami mentioned, the Prophet Islam, he didn't intend by this concern that not by me assured that he intend concerning a specific number. He's just trying to emphasize that any condition that is placed or any amount of condition that are placed upon are placed in something, if it is not valid, it doesn't count, regardless, and it has no circumstance to emphasize that this matter does not count. So it is mentioned, وَلَوْ كَانَ وَإِنْ كَانَ مِيَ شَرْطٍ. So this comes as a form of to emphasize that this thing is invalid. Then it mentioned in the hadith, so he mentioned, so he continued by saying in hadith, قَدَ اللَّهُ أَحَقْ وَشَرْطِ اللَّهِ أَوْثَقْ, that whatever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have ruled, what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have placed, have put in place, then these are the things that, they are the thing that stands. These are the things that they count. They mention, إِنَّ وَإِنَّمَا الْوَلَاءِ وَلَاءُ لِمَنْ أَعْتَقْ, that wala, it is for the person who released the slave, is for the person who freed the slave. So that's concerning that. So kind of somewhat to end regarding that. As for wala, the person who have the right to have that concession regarding inheritance and that link between themselves and their slave is the person who released them. So that's concerning the hadith that is mentioned here. So as for concerning the ahkam that can be taken from the hadith, so they mentioned concerning ma bal rijal, the ulama mentioned concerning that is hadith mentioned ma bal rijal. It mentioned concerning rijal. Some narration mentioned ma bal aqwam. Ma bal aqwam. So it's not specific to men. It just mentioned in that scenario concerning so that anyone, whether men or others, or anyone who put any stipulation, anything that is not valid or not in line with the Sharia, is not counted. Is not counted. So as for the next matter that can be discussed from the hadith, as taken mentioned here, that one of those can be taken, that Sheikh Abdullah Fawzani mentioned, al-hadith dalilun ala mashru'iyyat makatib ar-raqiq. So the hadith first, it proved regarding that the person who's a slave, that it is permissible, it is allowed that they can buy their freedom, that they can buy their freedom. لأنها طريق إلى تلخيصه من الرفق, where it is a way the person can take themselves out of being in a state of being of a slave of another person. And he mentioned, so this is if there's an agreement between the master and the slave regarding that, an agreement that a person will buy themselves out, then this is acceptable. This is something which is allowed if they have agreed upon a particular sum or particular thing that the person can buy themselves, can buy their freedom. That's the second, that's the first, that's concerning one matter that he mentioned concerning that. Also from this hadith, it shows that also that regarding concerning that concerning the kitaba, this type of agreement between the slave and the master, that it can be something that can be done in concerning that not taqseed, can be done by way of the payment, can be done by way of installment. So the agreement that the person will pay a certain sum, but that sum can be paid in installments. So it shows, as they mentioned, that every year they'll pay a certain amount. So it shows that paying this amount in installment is something which is allowed if it is agreed upon by both sides. Or it could be paid in one go. So it could be paid in one go, as Aisha wanted to pay everything in one go, to pay everything in one go. So also this can be done. So Aisha wanted to pay upfront, or a person want to pay upfront for the release of that slave, or to buy them and then release them, then also this is something which is allowed. And that was the intent of Aisha radhiyallahu anha. So Aisha mentioned that if you wish, if you want, that I could give everything to them on your then they show that everything can be done in one lump sum. Also from the hadith, it shows regarding that he mentioned hadith, also hadith, that hadith dalilun ala jawaz bay al-abd al-mukatib bishart al-itq, that also that a person can also concern that buy a slave with a condition that they want to release them. So a person who buys the slave, but their intent or with a condition that when they are bought, that they will be released. So that's also something which is allowed. This is something which is allowed. Aisha wanted to purchase Barira from her masters and then to release her. So this shows that it is something which is allowed. With the Prophet Islam that he made inkar, that he didn't per se made an inkar regarding al-ishtirat al-itq, regarding concerning what she wished to buy, and then to release, he didn't make inkar upon this, so show the permissibility of this. But his inkar, his disapproval, was regarding concerning that the matter where they want to stipulate that wilaya still remain with them. So the wilaya, the sellers want the wilaya, the previous owners or master, they still want the wilaya to still remain with them because of the benefit that can come with it. So the Prophet that he made inkar, he showed his disapproval regarding this stipulation still being made. So also, as I mentioned, that they so that's a matter that they mentioned that payment will be done in installments from what Bariya wanted to do, but Aisha wanted to pay everything in one go. Then also he mentioned a hadith also is a dalil ala anna wala liman i'taqa al-raqiq, that la liman ba'ahu. So he showed that also the hadith it shows that wilaya, it lies, this wilaya, which is this type of relation or between the person who have been bought and released, that the person who released them, they have wilaya with them. So the person, in the sense that they can inherit from them, they can be a part of, they can inherit with them, from them. So this wilaya lies between them. So that's concerning that goes for the person who released them, not the person who sold them. So the one who sold them have lost this wilaya, and the person who bought them and then released them, then they have that wilaya between themselves and that slave or that previous slave. So as for what they did regarding concern the buyers, that they made a stipulation that they will sell Barira, the slave girl, but with the condition that wilaya still remain with them. And this was what the Prophet Islam that he rejected. So the Prophet Islam, he rejected this stipulation that they still had the rights of wilaya, even though she was sold and also she was released by her new owner or by Aisha. Then the Prophet mentioned, the Prophet Islam, he was against this stipulation or condition that they had made. That is something which is batil. So that showed the concern that condition was not a valid condition, so it is to be rejected. So the ulama discussed concerning that if a contract is made and there are certain conditions that are mentioned inside the contract, but those conditions are batil, invalid, then the contract itself is still valid, but those stipulation or those conditions that are invalid, then they are not to be acknowledged and not to be acted upon. But the contract in general still stands. So the contract still stands. But as for certain stipulations that are not in line with Islam, then they are not to be acknowledged and they are not to be acted upon and to be rejected. So that's concerning that matter. Also regarding contract that may include certain things that are considered to be invalid. Those things that are invalid, they are to be removed, not to be acted upon, but the general contract is still old. The general contract is still considered to be valid. Also the hadith is a condition regarding So that's concerned. Also discussed regarding from the hadith here, discussed concerning a matter regarding a discussion between the ulama that why the Prophet Islam, so Prophet Muhammad Islam, when he mentioned washtari lahum wala, that when he mentioned that put a condition regarding wala goes to them, then he kind of somewhat then later on he negates this. He mentioned that that's not for them. Then why did the Prophet Islam initially mention this? The ulama kind of somewhat they had that discussion regarding how to kind of somewhat reconcile why the Prophet Islam initially mentioned this. Then later on the hadith he mentioned that concerning that he initially at the end of the hadith mentioned regarding concerning that he he mentioned washtariha. Then he mentioned that he mentioned innama awala liman i'taq, that wala is for the person who release the slave. He mentioned as to why he made that stipulation. When other ulama can someone try to reconcile this, of those who mentioned that wording, washtari lahum wila, that this is not a part of the hadith. some make this claim that that is not per se a part of the hadith. That wording is not per se that it is somewhat it is weak, but that approach is not also strong. So that view that said that mentioned that in trying to reconcile with this that they mentioned that statement that is mentioned as a part of the hadith that is actually not a part of the hadith, but that's not per se valid. It's a part of the hadith. So that view is not correct, as that wording it is mentioned by Tafarrad bihi al-Malik, but also Hisham and Urra, but I mentioned is from those who are said to be thiqah, and it is a part of the hadith. The second approach that ulama have taken regarding how to reconcile this, they mentioned that as for what is intended by this, that the Prophet ﷺ mentioned that even though it is mentioned or stated and even written, it has no validity. So even though something may be stated, but in reality, but it is not to be upheld. It's not to be carried through. It's not to be acted upon. So even though it is still stated or mentioned, but because it is not a valid requirement or condition or stipulation, is not to be carried through. So even though it is still mentioned or stated, but it is not to be acted upon. So meaning concerns that if it is present or not present, it means it has no meaning. It carries no bearing. So whether it is mentioned or not mentioned, it carries no bearing and have no benefit. So that's concerning of the other way the ulama try to reconcile regarding that matter. Also, from this hadith, it shows, as mentioned by Sheikh Abdullah Fawzan, that the ninth of the benefit he mentioned, fil hadith, dalilun ala jawaz bay at-taqsit. So we mentioned that from this hadith, it showed the permissibility of what is referred to as bay at-taqsit, which is payment by installment. So payment by installment, and that will be discussed again further, more. But from this hadith, it showed that payment by installment, that is something which is allowed, where the person wished to buy a particular item, and the cost of a certain amount. For example, the item costs £100 or dollars, but the person will pay, rather than pay everything in one go, they'll pay it in installments. So for example, every month they pay £20 until the amount is covered. That's concerning bay at-taqsit. Then this is something which is allowed. So bay payments by way of installment. Where if it doesn't include anything which is contrary, everything which is haram. So they mentioned that there's something which is a discussion between the ulama, that you find that majority of the ulama, they do give allowance to this type of payment by way of installment. So the ulama all that it is something which is allowed. Some of the ulama even kind of somewhat cited that is an ijma regarding this matter, but in reality, it's a call of jumhur of the ulama. So you find that the majority of the ulama, that they hold that it is something which is allowed regarding payment by way of installments. So as we mentioned in this scenario, if the person initially, when they agreed that the payment, the price is for £100, but the person will pay this amount on a monthly basis, X amount per month, until they complete the payment without any addition. So without any addition, so the amount was 100. They'll pay each month £20 for 5 months. Then that is allowed. So that's allowed to be done. So that's concerning in this context concerning bay at-taqsit. That is something which is allowed. So that's concerning of those matters that is mentioned inside of this particular hadith regarding the ahkam. So also from the hadith it shows regarding concern that that from the it said that Barira, that she talaba min Aisha, that she sought from Aisha radhiyallahu anha, that if she could intervene in her case. So seeking other people to intervene in their matters, and in this case regarding her release. So seeking for Aisha to help her regarding her release. So the Muslim seeking and asking of others to help them regarding certain situation they're in, then this is something which is allowed. And the person asking someone, especially someone who they believe that can assist them, asking someone who they believe that that person is able to can assist them and to intervene, then this is something which is allowed. They mention a discussion that Sheikh Saad al-Shitri, Hafidullah, that he mentioned in the explanation, mentioned that from this hadith that they mentioned that he mentioned Jawaz al-Bay al-Abd bi shart al-Atq, that concern that the person, the permissibility for a person that for the slave that to try to release themselves by way of by sale, that is something which is allowed. So the person buying themselves for their release, it is something which is allowed, something which is allowed, and that's the qawl of Jumhur of the ulama, with the condition that they are released. So the person with the condition, so the person to be purchased, but then also the condition that the person is released by the person who buys them. This is something which is allowed, except for the qawl of Abu Hanifa rahimahullah, who doesn't see this view. Abu Hanifa rahimahullah doesn't agree with that view, but the qawl of Jumhur of the ulama, that is something which is the person can stipulate as a condition that you buy me, but upon buying me, then you release me. As in the case of, in this is something which the Jumhur of the ulama, or that is something which is allowed. Also, Sa'd al-Shitr, he mentioned regarding concerning that this matter, he mentioned Jawaz Bay al-Mukatib. So the person who's looking to buy them, to buy their freedom, can this person be sold? He mentions, you know, it is something which is allowed, because Aisha, that she still bought the person who was trying to buy themselves out of freedom. So Aisha, as a third person, then came in and bought that person, wanted to buy that person, and then to release them. So can the person who is seeking to buy themselves out of into freedom, is this allowed? They mention here Jumhur of the ulama, or that it is something which is allowed, is something which is, or some of the ulama who that it is something which is allowed. And amongst those who say it is allowed, that's the view of Imam Malik, the view of Imam Ahmed rahimahullah. As for Abu Hanifa and Imam Shafi rahimahullah, they all consider anna mukatib la yajuz bay'u, that the person who's seeking to buy himself out of that situation, that they are not allowed to be purchased by, or not to be allowed to be traded or to be sold again. But I mentioned that that's all. But from the hadith, it showed the permissibility of this. The hadith, it showed that this is something which allowed the person to add an agreement with their owner, but then they asked Aisha to help them, where Aisha would buy them and then release them. So it shows regarding Yajuz al-Bay' al-Mukatib. So those are some of the benefits that have been mentioned regarding concerning this particular hadith. And also mention Jawaz Aqd al-Bay' Aqd al-Aqd Yahtawi ala Shart al-Fasid, that a person still can look at a contract that have certain stipulations that are not correct, but those things have to be dismissed and not acted upon. So the contract could be still a contract could still be made. If there's any condition that are not valid, they will be dismissed. But a contract on all, it still can stand. The contract on all still is said to be valid, but those things that are invalid, they will be removed and dismissed. So that's concerning those what can be taken from this hadith. As mentioned, that Ibn Hajar rahimullah, he mentioned over 100 and something benefits, and others will mention over 300 benefits that can be taken from this hadith. So that's concerning the hadith that we have just mentioned regarding what is stated regarding a person, regarding a contract that have stipulations that are not valid. And for that, the Muslim generally should not go into or make an agreement that contradict Islam. So a person not putting stipulation on others when those stipulations are in contrary to the Sharia and Islam, the person should not per se put those things as a condition regarding any agreement that they have with others. So that inshallah will end the session regarding concerning this hadith of Aisha radhiyallahu anha and this story regarding Barira and some of the benefits that we can take, and primarily concerning what relates to Kitab al-Buyu, as we have discussed. So with this inshallah ta'ala will end. وَبِاللَّهِ تَعَالَى تَوْفِيقٌ وَهَادِي السَّبِيلُ وَالْآخِرُ دَعْوَانَا الْحَمْدُ لِلَّهِ. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah wa barakatuh.